They drove me to that place with smiles that cut sharper than knives, telling me it was for my own good. But as I stepped inside and smelled the damp walls and saw the peeling paint, I realized they weren't leaving me in comfort. They were throwing me away. And when I begged them to take me home, they only laughed, as if the years I spent sacrificing for them had been nothing but a joke. Thank you so much for watching and giving me a little of your time. It means more than I can ever put into words. And before I go on, I would love to know where you are watching from. So please tell me in the comments, because it warms my heart to see how far my story can travel and how many eyes and ears are willing to sit with me tonight. You see, when they left me standing in that broken place and the sound of their laughter still echoed in my head, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. The woman who once worked through nights to keep food on the table was now treated as if she were nothing, and the walls of that room felt like they were closing in on me, reminding me, with every crack and shadow, that the love I thought would hold me in my old age had turned into something cruel. I sat there trembling, trying to steady my breath, telling myself not to cry too loudly because I did not want anyone to hear me break. Yet the tears came anyway, and each one told the story of sacrifice, of meals I skipped, of jewelry I sold, of dreams I buried, all so that they could rise higher than I ever could. And as I wiped my face with the back of my hand, I whispered to myself that this could not be the end of my story, not after everything I had given. I was born into a world where nothing came easy, yet I carried a spirit that refused to bend. And when I became a mother, I poured every ounce of that spirit into raising them, believing that if I gave them more than I had ever been given, they would grow to honor me in ways I had only dreamed of. I remember the nights when the hunger in my stomach was so sharp that it kept me awake, but I still found a way to smile as I placed food on their plates, watching them eat, as though my own body did not matter, because in my heart their comfort was my only nourishment. I remember selling the small gold bracelet my mother left me, a piece of her memory I had guarded so closely, just so I could pay for new school shoes, and when I handed them those shoes, I pretended the loss meant nothing, though it felt like I had given away a piece of myself. I remember working nights cleaning offices, the smell of bleach burning my nose, my fingers cracked and raw from scrubbing floors, yet every morning I woke up early to cook them breakfast before sending them off to school, whispering prayers over them that they would never know the hardships I knew. As they grew, I found myself sacrificing more than I thought one heart could bear. Missing out on sleep, on rest, on the chance to enjoy even the smallest luxuries, because I told myself it would all come back to me one day, not in money, not in grand gifts, but in love, in respect, in the gentle care of a family I had built with my own 2 hands. When they succeeded, when one of them graduated, when another found a good job, I clapped the loudest, tears of joy streaming down my face, and I told everyone I knew that my sacrifices had been worth it, that my children were my pride, the reason I never gave up even when the world felt too heavy. But what I did not see, or perhaps what I refused to admit, were the small cracks in the way they looked at me. The sighs when I asked them for simple company, the dismissive tone when I tried to share stories from my past, as if my voice was nothing but background noise in the rhythm of their busy lives. I held on tightly to the memories of when they were small, when their little hands used to reach for mine, when they used to whisper promises that they would always take care of me. And I let those memories blind me to the way their love had cooled into duty and their duty had cooled into burden. I convinced myself that every cold word, every forgotten call, every rushed visit was just life being demanding. That deep down, they still cherished me. Because admitting otherwise would have broken me in ways I wasn't sure I could survive. So I kept loving, I kept giving, I kept believing, until the day their laughter followed me into that place. And in that moment, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I had given up flashed before my eyes, not as proof of love fulfilled, but as a reminder that sometimes the ones you give everything to can take everything from you and leave you with nothing but silence. The day everything began to truly unravel is still carved deep in my memory. as if the air itself carried the weight of betrayal before the words were even spoken. It started small, with hurried conversations between them that fell silent when I walked into the room, with glances exchanged across the table that they thought I could not see, and with the cold distance in their voices whenever I asked the simplest of questions, questions that any mother should be free to ask. Questions like how they were doing, when we might sit together again, or whether they remembered the small traditions I had kept alive for years. I noticed how their visits grew shorter, their eyes always flicking toward the clock, their laughter reserved for each other, while I sat quietly, waiting for my turn to feel included. And though I told myself it was just the busyness of life, my heart knew something darker was forming beneath the surface, something I could not yet name. Then came the day they sat me down with false smiles stretched across their faces, their voices coated with sugar but hiding the bitterness of their intentions. And they told me they had found a place for me, a place they described as safe, comfortable, and perfect for someone my age, a place where I would be looked after without worry. I listened as they spoke, their words rolling off their tongues like rehearsed lines in a play, and I felt a chill creep into my bones, because in all their talk of safety and comfort, not once did I hear the language of love. Not once did I hear the promise of presence, of care, of genuine devotion. I tried to protest. I told them I was fine in my own home. I reminded them of the memories rooted in those walls, the photographs still hanging, the smell of the kitchen where I had fed them for decades, but they dismissed my words with quick assurances, as if my voice no longer carried weight in the life I had built for them. When the day arrived, they drove me in silence, the car filled with the kind of emptiness that speaks louder than arguments. And as the city gave way to streets I did not recognize, I clutched my bag tightly in my lap, praying that my fears were only imagination, that maybe they truly had found a place that would give me peace. But when the car slowed and I saw the building before me, my heart sank like a stone thrown into deep water, because it was not the kind of place that held dignity. It was tired, broken, and smelled of hopelessness. The paint peeled from the walls, the windows looked clouded with years of neglect, and the very air carried the sour scent of despair. And in that instant, I knew this was not a gift of care, it was an act of disposal. I turned to them, my voice trembling, and I asked them to reconsider. I reminded them of the nights I had walked home in the rain so they could sleep under warm blankets. I told them how I had sold the last piece of jewelry I had left, just so they could have tuition when there was no money left. But instead of softening, they laughed. A cruel laugh that sliced through me, telling me I would be fine here, telling me that they had lives of their own now, as if I had never been the center of theirs. I watched them leave, their laughter echoing down the hallway long after the door closed behind them, and I stood frozen, feeling as though the ground beneath me had given way, leaving me to fall into a darkness I had never known before. That first night in that place was the longest night of my life. The mattress stiff beneath me, the sounds of strangers crying out in their sleep drifting through the walls, and the cold realization pressing against my chest that the people I had loved more than life itself had chosen convenience over compassion. I cried quietly into my pillow, not wanting anyone to hear me break. But with each tear I also felt a strange clarity, as if the pieces of my heart were whispering to me that this betrayal was not the end of me, but perhaps the beginning of something else, something I had yet to discover. And though the pain was sharp, a seed of strength buried itself deep within me that night, waiting for its time to grow. As the days passed in that place, I began to notice that the silence was louder than the voices around me, because it was the silence of being forgotten, of knowing that the very people who promised to visit, to call, to check in, had simply turned the key and walked away, as though I were nothing but an obligation they had finally rid themselves of. I watched other faces around me, some as lost as I felt, others dulled by years of waiting for visits that never came, and I realized I was becoming one of them, sitting by the window each afternoon, hoping to see familiar figures walk through the door, only to be met with strangers and shadows. Each time the phone rang at the front desk, my heart leapt foolishly. only to sink again when it was never for me. And each time the door opened, I straightened myself, brushing down my dress as though preparing to greet them, but they never came. And the weight of that absence crushed me more than the walls of that building ever could. At night, when the lights dimmed and the building settled into its eerie quiet, I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying every sacrifice, every choice I had made to put them first. And I asked myself over and over how love could wither into something so cold. I remembered the warmth of their little hands clutching mine when they were young, the way their voices once called for me with trust and need, and I wondered when that trust had turned into resentment, when that need had twisted into a burden. The betrayal burned deeper with every memory, and the laughter that followed me into that room haunted me in the silence, reminding me that in their eyes I had become a problem to be solved, not a mother to be cherished. But as the tears slid down my cheeks, I also began to feel something shift inside me. A hardening, a quiet flame, rising from the ashes of my heartbreak. Because while they may have abandoned me here, they had underestimated the strength I had spent a lifetime building. They had forgotten that the same woman who worked nights to keep a roof over their heads was not a woman who would crumble so easily. That the same woman who sold her last treasures to buy their books was not a woman who would surrender her dignity without a fight. And so, in those lonely hours, I began to see more clearly than ever before that their betrayal, as cruel as it was, had given me something I had lost for years. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when the illusions of love are stripped away, leaving only truth behind. I whispered to myself that night, my voice soft but steady, that I would not spend the rest of my life waiting by windows, listening for footsteps that would never come, and that the story they tried to write for me, the story of a forgotten woman left in a broken place, would not be the final chapter of my life. I promised myself that if I had survived years of hunger, loneliness, and sacrifice for their sake, then I could survive this too. And not only survive but rise in a way that would remind them of who I truly was, a mother who gave everything and still had strength left to stand on her own. It was during one of those heavy mornings, when the sun barely managed to push its way through the dirty window, that I found myself sitting alone in the corner of the common room, staring at nothing, and trying to piece together the strength I had promised myself. My thoughts were tangled in pain, but also in determination. When I felt a gentle hand rest on my shoulder, and for the first time since being left there, I looked up and saw kindness in someone's eyes. She was a nurse, not much older than my own children. But unlike them, she carried patience in her voice and concern in the way she looked at me, as if she could see the weight I was carrying without me saying a word. She asked me softly if I was all right, and though the tears threatened to spill, I managed a small smile, the kind of smile that hides pain, and whispered that I would be fine. But she did not just walk away like so many others did. She pulled up a chair and sat beside me, and in that moment, I realized how long it had been since anyone had chosen to simply stay with me, to listen, to care. Day by day, she became a quiet presence in my life, checking on me, asking me about my past, and listening when I shared small pieces of my story. Her kindness stirred something inside me that I thought had been buried, a reminder that there were still people in the world who could see me as more than a burden, who could recognize the woman behind the weary face. And one evening, as the day faded into a calm silence, she leaned in and told me something that made my heart beat stronger. She said she had seen what my children had done. She had seen how they left me here, and she did not think it was right. She told me she knew people who could help me if I wanted, and that I did not have to stay in that place if it wasn't where I belonged. At first, I was hesitant, fear clashing with hope, but the way she spoke, steady and unwavering, gave me courage I didn't know I still had. For so long, I had believed that my fate was sealed, that I would spend my final years forgotten in those cracked walls, but her words cracked open a door I thought was forever closed. That night, lying in bed, I thought of her promise, of the way she had looked at me not with pity, but with respect. And I realized that perhaps God had placed her in my path as a reminder that I was not as powerless as I felt. From then on, my tears were no longer only born of sorrow. They carried within them the faintest glimmer of strength, the knowledge that even though the people I loved most had abandoned me, there was still compassion to be found. And with that compassion came the possibility of change. I began to whisper to myself in the dark, not words of despair but words of preparation. Words that reminded me that my story was not yet over, and with the help of one unexpected ally, I might just be able to take back everything they thought they had stolen from me. The next days felt different, as if a quiet current of strength had begun to flow through me. And though I still woke to the same cracked walls and the same lifeless meals, my heart no longer sank the way it once did, because now I carried with me the promise of a way out. I would sit by the window in the afternoons, the light falling across my face, and I would think of all the years I had bent and broken myself for the sake of others, and how now, finally, I had the chance to stand again for myself. The nurse, my quiet ally, would come by with small notes of encouragement, words whispered so no one else could hear, and each one reminded me that I was not abandoned by the whole world, only by those who had chosen their convenience over their conscience. One evening, she slipped me a folded piece of paper, her eyes urging me to keep it safe, and when I opened it later under the dim lamp of my room, I found written the name of a lawyer and a number to call. A man she said could be trusted, someone who understood situations like mine. My hands trembled as I held the paper, not from fear but from the weight of possibility. Because in that single moment, I realized I was no longer a woman waiting by the door for visitors who would never come. I was someone preparing to reclaim her life. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself the names of the things I still owned, the house, the land, the accounts I had guarded all these years. And I thought about how little they knew of the steps I had taken long ago to protect myself. Steps they never imagined because they assumed I was weak. Steps they dismissed because they thought age had stripped me of my wisdom. With each passing day, I began to see their betrayal less as an ending and more as a turning point, a moment that forced me to open my eyes wider than ever before. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had written the last page of my story by leaving me there. But what they did not know was that their laughter had only awakened the part of me that remembered exactly who I was. I was not just the woman who bent so they could rise. I was not just the mother who gave until nothing was left. I was also the keeper of the keys they believed were theirs, the guardian of the future they counted on inheriting. And with every breath I took, I became more certain that the day would come when they would stand in shock, realizing too late that the power they thought they stripped from me had never left my hands. The morning I finally gathered the courage to act felt heavier than most. Yet deep inside me there was a steadiness that had not been there before. I woke with a clear mind, my hands no longer shaking with despair, but firm with determination. And as I sat on the edge of that stiff bed, I whispered to myself that this was the day my life would begin to shift. I had the paper tucked safely in the lining of my bag, the name and number of the lawyer etched into my memory, and with the help of my kind ally, I managed to make the call that would change everything. My voice low but steady as I explained who I was, what had been done to me, and what I still held in my name. He listened carefully, his tone calm but strong, and when he assured me that I had more power than I realized, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a reminder that I was not finished, that I was still standing even after everything they had tried to do to me. The days that followed became a secret rhythm. Quiet meetings arranged with care, documents reviewed and updated with precision. Each signature I placed on those papers felt like I was stitching my dignity back together piece by piece. And with every page I signed, I thought of their laughter the day they left me. A sound that once cut me, but now fueled me. I remembered how sure they were that I would remain in that forgotten place. How confident they were that the house, the land, and the savings I had built would one day fall neatly into their hands. And the thought of their faces when they discovered the truth gave me strength to push through my fear. Every step was taken in silence, No loud words, no angry confrontations, just the quiet determination of a woman who had been underestimated too many times. And as I prepared for the final arrangements, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt free. For the first time since they left me in that broken home, I could breathe without the weight of abandonment crushing my chest. Because I knew I was no longer their prisoner. I was no longer the victim of their cruelty. I was the author of the next chapter. And they would soon realize that the woman they thought they had discarded was still far stronger than they could ever imagine. The day I walked out of that place will never leave my memory. Because it was not just a step through a doorway, it was a step back into myself, into the dignity they thought they had stolen from me. My ally stood quietly by my side, her presence steady, and as the papers were signed and the final words exchanged, I felt the weight of those walls lift from my shoulders, the smell of decay and hopelessness fading behind me with every step I took. I carried only a small bag, nothing more, yet I felt as though I was carrying the whole of my past, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence. And as I crossed that threshold, I promised myself I would never again be caged by the choices of others. The air outside felt different, fresh, alive, almost as though the world itself was reminding me that freedom does not come with grand fanfare, but with quiet, deliberate steps. I looked up at the sky, its vastness stretching over me, and I thought of how small they must have believed it to be, how powerless they assumed I had become, and I smiled to myself because they had no idea that I had already begun rewriting the ending they planned for me. The car that carried me away felt like a carriage of renewal. Each mile putting distance between me and the place of betrayal. Each turn of the wheels carrying me closer to the life I deserved. A life where my name still held power and my choices still mattered. When I arrived at the home I had chosen for myself, a place filled not with grandeur but with peace, I stepped through the door and felt the warmth of belonging wrap itself around me, not because of who was waiting there, but because of the decision I had made to claim it. I ran my hand along the wooden table, breathed in the scent of fresh flowers by the window, and I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was standing in a space that reflected not abandonment but survival. I whispered into the stillness that I was no longer the woman they had mocked, no longer the mother they believed they could cast aside. I was the keeper of my own story. And though they had tried to bury me in shame, I had risen with silence as my shield and dignity as my crown. In the days that followed my return to a life of my own choosing, I began to feel a peace I had almost forgotten existed, a quiet rhythm that came not from waiting on anyone else, but from finally listening to myself. Each morning I would wake to the soft light pouring through clean windows, not the dim shadows of that place I had been left in, and I would sit at my table with a warm cup of tea, breathing in the freedom that came from knowing every choice in this home was mine. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the walls, arranging the curtains, placing photographs where they belonged, and with each detail I restored, I felt like I was restoring pieces of myself that had been buried beneath betrayal and pain. There were moments when memories threatened to pull me back. Moments when I saw their faces in my mind, the cold dismissal in their eyes, the way they laughed as if my life had no value. And for a heartbeat I felt that old ache return. But then I reminded myself that their choices no longer defined me, that the chains they tried to place around my spirit had already been broken. I found comfort in the small rituals of independence, cooking my meals just the way I liked them, tending to a little garden outside, even humming softly to myself as I watered the plants, each leaf soaking in care from hands that were no longer trembling with despair. At night, I would sit by the window, the stars stretching across the sky, and I thought about how betrayal can cut deep, but it also carves space for strength to grow. And I realized that my life was no longer about waiting for them to come back with apologies or empty gestures. My life was about me, about reclaiming what they thought they had taken, about showing myself that I was still capable of building joy out of ruins. The silence that once hurt me had changed. It was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace, the kind that allows the soul to breathe freely without fear. And though they did not know it yet, I was living proof that dignity cannot be destroyed by cruelty. It only waits to be remembered. It was a few weeks later, when the moment I had quietly imagined finally arrived. For while I had been settling into the calm of my new life, I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back. Not out of love or concern, but out of habit, out of the belief that I was still where they had left me, waiting in silence for scraps of their attention. That day, as I sat in my chair with sunlight pouring over my shoulders, I thought of how they would walk through those doors at that broken place, expecting to see me bent and defeated, ready to accept whatever mockery they might bring with them. But what they found instead was the guard at the entrance, standing firm, telling them words that must have struck their hearts with confusion that I did not live there anymore. I pictured the look on their faces, the disbelief as they demanded answers, the sharpness in their voices as they tried to understand how the mother they had abandoned had slipped from their grasp without a sound. I imagined their frustration rising as they realized the easy control they thought they had was gone, replaced by silence they could not break through. While they stood there, questioning and searching for explanations, I sat miles away in the warmth of a home that carried my name, smiling softly to myself because their ignorance was no longer my burden to carry. It was not anger that filled me as I thought of them. It was something deeper, a calm strength born from knowing that justice does not always arrive with noise and confrontation. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet realization that those who believed they had stripped you of everything discover too late that you still hold the one thing they cannot touch: your dignity. That day, I did not need to see them to feel the shift. I knew the moment they heard those words, the ground beneath their arrogance began to crumble. And though they had once left me with laughter, they now walked away in silence, and that silence was worth more than any apology they could ever offer. I often think about that silence, the way it must have wrapped around them heavier than any words I could have spoken. Because sometimes the absence of a voice carries more power than the loudest scream, and in that silence they were forced to face what they had done. They expected me to remain broken, sitting in that place with tired eyes, waiting for them to decide when I was worth a visit. But instead, they were met with a truth they could not control, a truth that said I had moved on without them. And though they may never admit it out loud, I know deep inside it shook them, because for the first time in their lives, they had no hold over me. What they did not realize was that every cruel laugh, every dismissive word, every act of betrayal had been the very fuel I needed to rise again. And when I chose silence, it was not weakness, it was my greatest revenge. They lost more than just my presence. They lost the certainty of the future they once counted on. Because while they thought I was helpless, I had already rewritten everything. The house, the land, the accounts, all shifted into places where their hands could never reach. I could almost see the moment it would dawn on them, the way their dreams of inheritance would crumble into dust. And I felt no guilt, only peace, because they had traded love for greed, and greed always leaves empty hands. As I sat in the comfort of my new home, I reflected on how betrayal can break a heart, but it can also sharpen it, and mine had become sharper than they ever imagined. I did not need to stand before them to watch their arrogance collapse, because I knew the day was coming when their laughter would be replaced with regret, when their silence would not be chosen but forced upon them. And all I had to do was live my life with dignity, knowing that the greatest punishment was not the words I could throw back at them, but the life I had reclaimed without them by my side. In the quiet of my days now, I no longer dwell on the pain of what was done to me. Instead, I carry with me the peace of knowing that I rose from it stronger, that I took back what they thought they had taken, and that I live not in bitterness, but in freedom. Their choices may have broken the bond we once shared, but they did not break me. And that is the lesson I hold close, that no matter how deep the betrayal, dignity can always be reclaimed if you choose to stand for yourself. I have learned that love without respect is empty, and that silence can be the loudest answer of all. And in that truth I have found a strength that no betrayal can erase. Thank you, my dear ones, for staying with me until the very end of my story. It means more than you know. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you have not already, I invite you to subscribe so that you can be here with me for the next story I share.